Looking for a simple way to create a small, self-contained 12-volt system that can be remotely monitored from the cloud? You've come to the right place. Hi, I'm Jonathan from Tiny Shiny Home, and our family is building an off-grid desert homestead from the ground up here in Cochise County, Arizona. Our dream is to build sustainably using solar power, water catchment, and natural building techniques to create an oasis in the desert. Now, we're already powering most of our property with our big DIY 28 kilowatt-hour solar system, but in the name of redundancy, we've also begun to set up some small 12-volt systems that we use for pump houses and sheds. The setup we're going to cover today might be overkill for what you need. There are absolutely simpler and cheaper ways to set up small DC systems. Our first pump house literally just had a small solar panel, a cheap charge controller, a battery, and an RV pump. And we've pushed thousands of gallons through that thing, pressurizing water for our trailer and building multiple earth bag buildings with it. There's nothing wrong with keeping things simple. But as we started to install more of these mini 12-volt systems on our property that didn't have access to AC power or to internet, we felt like we should invest in a better way to keep tabs on them. Our main solar system was already set up with a Victron Quattro inverter, smart solar charge controllers, and a color control GX that was passing data to Victron's VRM, a remote management portal that you can access from anywhere on any device. We've been super happy not only with the performance of the gear, but with the VRM itself. Victron's website and apps are well designed, provide deep levels of customization and reporting, and continue to have active development unlocking new features like widgets on iOS or enabling Bluetooth connectivity for data transfers for nearby components. So with all that in mind, we decided to use the Victron VRM as a base for all of our mini 12-volt systems. This would allow us to see all of our power installs in one spot. Our biggest issue was that each power system we wanted to connect to the cloud was buried beneath metal roofing or inside earthbag walls, and it wasn't anywhere near a Wi-Fi signal or an internet connection. So we're going to get nerdy and figure out how to make this work, but first let's talk some high-level specs. Currently, we have 4 VRM systems. There's our solar shed, which is the main full system, and then all the mini VRM systems, our feed shed, Airstream cover pump house, and earthbag chicken garden pump house. Our pump houses usually run a 12-volt water pump, lights, and an RV tank pad heater, and our feed shed has LED lights and venting fans. These are intentionally low power systems, and we're not trying to pull any high draws from them. For battery storage, we usually go with a 12-volt, 100 amp hour deep cycle lead acid battery. These are easy to grab pretty much anywhere, fairly inexpensive, and resistant to the wild temperature swings we can get here in the high desert. They're also tough and they don't need fancy BMSs or additional protection. For the solar panel, you could totally use just a 100-watt Renogy panel. They're really good, but we've been using these Santan solar panels. They're 240 watts and they're half the cost. For the solar charge controller, since we're sticking with the Victron ecosystem, the Smart Solar 75-volt 15 amp is the perfect size for that 240-watt panel without breaking the bank. And to relay data about the battery's state of charge and current, we use the Victron Smart Shunt. We also make sure to install fusing and protection, even a small load center with blade fuses for individual loads, but we'll get to that in a minute. My general goal here is to give each system breathing room to power what it needs to power and get charged back up during the day. Is it oversized? Probably, but solar panels and batteries are so cheap, I would rather set this up and not have to worry about it and have options for expandability later. Disclaimer, I'm not an electrician, nor do I play one on YouTube. All information here is solely for entertainment purposes, and all electrical work should be performed by qualified individuals according to local electric codes. Cool? Cool. FYI, since we're going to be throwing around a lot of terms and information, we do have a full detailed blog article with diagrams and links and more on our site. It should be a very handy guide to reference if needed. Just use the link below or in the description to access it. As part of this deep dive, we've created a very detailed replica of our wiring diagram. Now you'll see it throughout the video and in the article, but if you want to grab a high-res PDF copy you can zoom in on and reference for later, you can grab a copy here. Now, the biggest hurdle in this whole idea was to connect each Victron component in each system to the VRM. To do this, you need a GX device from Victron that will serve as a central brain for the system. And then you have to have a network to connect the GX device to so it can push that data up to the cloud. Because our various buildings were spread out all over our 6 acres and not near a Wi-Fi network, this is where things got tricky. Let's take a look at our options. Number 1, the Color Control GX. This unit has a screen built in and multiple ways to connect components. But if you're not near a Wi-Fi network, you need a cell-based modem to connect to the internet. This is by far the most expensive option at around $550, plus the $250 for the modem, and you have to bring your own data plan. Definitely overkill for a small system like this. Number 2, the Serbo GX. This unit has even more inputs but no display, so it comes in a bit cheaper at $350. There's also the S version with fewer inputs that costs $270. But you'd still need that $250 modem and your own data plan, and this still felt like overkill for a small 12-volt system. Number 3, the Global Link 520. This unit was definitely more like it. It's a very simple GX device with only 2 physical inputs, and it comes with a built-in LTE-M antenna and a 5-year data plan for only $230. With such a simple system, we really didn't need to monitor more than solar input and the battery state of charge, so this seemed like a good option. Number 4, the Raspberry Pi plus the Venus OS. Not only does Victron do a great job of keeping their software up to date, but they're also super hacker friendly. Case in point, the software that actually runs on their GX devices is available as an open source download that you can install on any computer you want. Many folks have bought cheap Raspberry Pi mini computers, installed the Venus firmware, and made their own versions of the GX devices. While this sounds cool on paper, you still have to be close to a Wi-Fi network, or you need to bring your own modem and cell plan, and by the time you buy all of these pieces and spend all the time putting it together, you still aren't really saving that much money compared to a Global Link. Finally, the most nerdy of options, long-range wide area networks, or LoRaWAN. LoRaWAN? I don't know how you say it. It's the Internet of Things. These gateways pass small bits of data for very long distances, like anywhere from 1 to 18 miles. There might be one in your area. You can check the map to see if you have coverage nearby. And if not, you can even set up your own gateway for others to use. While this is fascinating that Victron even makes this piece of gear, it is a little bit limited. It only connects to one piece of equipment, so you can only monitor one thing at a time, and at $80, it just doesn't seem like a good fit for this project. As you may have seen in the diagram, we went with the Global Link 520. It hit the sweet spot for us in terms of functionality, simplicity, and cost for our size system. We could run hard data connections to the solar charge controller and the smart shunt, which then passes that info into the VRM for monitoring and reporting. Recently, Victron upgraded the firmware on these units to allow even more components to connect via Bluetooth and pass that data to the VRM, which expands the possibilities with this little unit quite a bit. Later, we'll look at how we can use a Ruuvi sensor to pass temperature and humidity into the VRM and even set up custom alarms for freezing conditions. Since each of these 12-volt systems would be in pump houses or dusty conditions like our feed shed, I wanted a way to protect and contain all of the components. Turns out that these plastic storage totes from the hardware store are a great off-the-shelf solution that don't cost much. A 12 by 26 by 18 bin is the perfect size to put your battery and a few pieces of scrap wood for mounting everything to for easy access. The walls are thin and easy to drill through, so you can install rubber grommets to run wires through. While these boxes aren't water or airtight, they do provide considerable protection for what's inside. And since the lid isn't technically sealed, it does allow that lead acid battery to vent, and if you're worried about it, you can even drill a hole in the side and add your own vent of choice. This allows you to put everything except the solar panel in the box, carry it wherever you want, and then run the loads when you're ready. All 3 of our mini VRM systems live in these boxes, and we're big fans. Alright, let's look at how all this is connected. Since everything in the storage tote is so close together, 10 or 12 gauge wires should suffice for most connections. But of course, if you're running a high load over a long distance, those wires need to be sized appropriately. I wish each connection was consistent, but you'll be encountering everything from crimp-on ring connectors to spade or butt terminals to screw clamps. I recommend having wire strippers, crimpers, screwdrivers, and some connectors on hand because you're going to be making most of these wires yourself. We mentioned earlier that we were using a 240 watt used solar panel from Santan Solar. It runs at 37 volts or 8 amps, and generally PV wire is 10 gauge. So you want to start by running the PV positive and negative wire to a 2-pole 10 amp circuit breaker. From the breaker, we go to the positive and negative PV in on the Smart Solar charge controller. And then coming out of the charge controller, the positive will run through a 25 amp mini A&L fuse and cover to the positive post of the battery. This is an additional source of protection for the battery for any spikes that might come from that solar charge controller. From here, we come off the positive post of the battery through a 25 amp DC circuit breaker into a small fuse block or load center. This will allow us to isolate each item we want to connect and fuse them individually. Now, onto the Victron gear. The Victron Smart Shunt connects its battery minus side directly to the negative post of the battery. The system minus side is where all the other negative wires will connect together. There's also a VBAT plus wire that connects directly to the positive battery post. Finally, the GlobalLink 520 is hardwired directly to the battery so it always has power. At this point, you can also connect the solar charge controller and Smart Shunt to the GlobalLink with VE direct cables so they all start talking to each other. Before we connect any loads, let's tweak our settings on the Victron components. The easiest way to change settings is to use the Victron Connect app on a smartphone or tablet. This is done via Bluetooth, so you just have to be close by and you'll see the option to connect. For the Smart Shunt, we want to tell the system what voltage and capacity we're dealing with. In our case, that meant a 100 amp hour battery capacity and a charged voltage of 13.2 volts. We didn't feel the need to change any of the other settings and left those as is. For the Smart Solar MPPT 75 volt 15 amp, we need to tell it how to charge the battery. So here's a fun story. When we buy our batteries, we usually just grab them at Walmart. They're easy to get, they're cheap. The brand is Everstart. So I called up Everstart and I was like, hey, what settings do I need to charge your battery properly to float and absorb and do all those things? And the person on the other end of the line had no idea. Didn't have a spec sheet, didn't have any information they could give me. And I'm like, the battery only does one thing. Shouldn't you know those numbers? And they didn't know those numbers. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go with generic 12 volt lead acid battery charging settings. Tap user defined for the battery preset, set the absorption to 14.3, the float to 13.4, and the equalization to 14.3. The rest of the settings we left as is. For the GlobalLink 520, you need to connect that device to your VRM portal. Now, if you don't already have a VRM account, make sure to create that first. Then click Add Installation and choose the GlobalLink 520 icon. It's going to ask you for the VRM portal ID on the back of the GlobalLink 520. So if you've already installed everything, you're going to have to disconnect the wires, unscrew it from the piece of wood, turn it over, write that number down, enter it in, learn from my mistake, and take a picture of this before you do your full install. Pop that number in, give it a name, and as long as the GlobalLink is connected to the LTE network, you should see it load in your VRM. And that's pretty much it. To keep data usage low, the GlobalLink only updates every 15 minutes, and you'll see the solar input wattage and battery state of charge. And now that you're connected to the VRM, you can set up your own custom alarms, notifications, or turn on custom widgets and run detailed reports. I mentioned earlier that I had my eye on some Ruuvi humidity and temperature sensors since Victron updated the GlobalLink to talk to them wirelessly. Well, I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer and I ordered some while I was working on this guide. I'm going to use these sensors to keep track of the temperatures inside of our pump houses and even set up custom notification alarms to let me know if they drop below freezing. Here's how it works. First, download the Ruuvi app on your phone, pull out the plastic battery stopper, and then connect the device to the Ruuvi app. Here you can set up some settings like giving it a name, but really what you're doing is activating it so that the GlobalLink can see it. Now just go put it inside your pump house near GlobalLink. Open the Victron app on your phone and connect to the GlobalLink. Go to Settings, Smart Devices, and wait a minute for the Ruuvi tag to show up. Activate it, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Now you are going to have to wait until it refreshes again. Remember, it only does that every 15 minutes. Once it does, you should see that temperature sensor show up on the dashboard. To create custom notifications, just go into the installation in the VRM, choose Settings, Alarm Rules. Select Add New Alarm Rule, choose the Ruuvi tag as the device, then the temperature parameter, and then set your specific amounts on the next screen. This was the only part of this setup that felt confusing because you can set the VRM to show temperatures in Fahrenheit or Celsius, but for some reason when setting the settings for this alarm, it only works in Celsius. So here's what I did. The low was -2, clear low alarm above was 0, the high was 43, and the clear high alarm above was 37. Then just make sure you do have notifications set up so you can receive them via email or push notifications. Fancy. Now that the main system is connected, it's time to add your loads. From a high-level standpoint, you're going to take the positive wire from your item into the load center and fuse it appropriately. The blade fuse should be roughly 1.25 times the max amperage that item will draw. Then the negative wire from that item will go to the system minus side of the shunt. I'll walk you through a few examples of how we're using our system, but really, what you connect and how you use it is up to you. This AC Infinity Air Titan T8 was the perfect size to fit over our barn doors in the feed shed, and it used DC motors, so all I had to do was chop off the AC power brick and wire it directly into the 12-volt system. It even has built-in temperature and humidity sensors with programmable alarms and settings to tell the fan to come on exactly when we want it to. We found these super simple string lights that run very low power, have shatterproof bulbs, and connect using a USB connection. Technically, USB is 5 volts, so we needed a 12-volt USB outlet, and the model we found even had a switch for the whole thing. This worked out perfectly so that the person coming into the shed could just flip the lights on from a remote switch and not have to open the power box and get in there to turn things on. These are very easy to wires. They come with most of the connections already installed. We just needed to run the positive and negative to the switch and then plug in the USB lights. Creating pressurized water from a holding tank was the main reason we even started making these 12-volt systems to begin with. At the time, we didn't even have AC power on the property, and we needed a way to get pressurized water to our trailer. Since then, we've seen the value of redundancy in making sure that our water source isn't connected to our main power source. This SureFlow 12-volt pump is a little powerhouse. We've been using one in our renovated vintage Airstream for 5 years without a hiccup. Then we put one in our first solar-powered pump house over 2 years ago and have pumped thousands and thousands of gallons without any issues. It's highly recommended, especially if you pair it with a large accumulator tank. We usually run these through a switch for easy access, and it's just a matter of connecting the positive and negative wires. Something we've been trying recently is looking for a low power way to keep the inside of our pump houses warm enough so they don't freeze in the winter. The jury's still out on whether these tank heater pads actually do their job, but theoretically they should come on when it gets cold and provide some warmth near your water lines. So how much should the system cost? It's a great question. We're going to look at a detailed breakdown. I'm going to reference my notes because it's a lot of different things. First is the 12 by 26 by 18 storage tote. It's only $19, not too bad. Those 240 watt used Santan solar panels are $45. You might need some brackets to mount that panel to something, so I use these Z brackets, they're $8. You'll probably need at least 20 feet of PV wire to connect your solar panel, both positive and negative. That costs about $40. Then you'll need 10 or 15 feet of 10 or 12 gauge wire, both red and black, and that'll cost about $30. You'll need 2 Victron VE direct cables, and those are $34. That 100 amp hour deep cycle lead acid battery will probably cost about $120. The 2-pole 10 amp circuit breaker is $16. The Victron Smart Solar 75 volt 15 amp is $119. The Smart Shunt is $130. And the Global Link 520 is $230. The mini A&L fuse holder is $13. The fuse itself is only $5. The DC circuit breaker is $46, and the load center is $25. So that brings us to a grand total of $880. Now, obviously, again, this is not the cheapest way to make a small 12-volt system, but if you need to monitor the system remotely, if you're off-grid, you're not near a Wi-Fi signal, we think this is a great way to do it. It's great to have a rock-solid cell connection that's passing the data into the VRM and then accessible on any device at any time. During our most recent project, moving our Airstream to a permanent covered location, we actually found ourselves in a situation where we had AC power at the pump house. We could have switched the whole system to run on 120 volt AC power, but instead we created a dual charging system. Everything would stay the same except we would add a Victron Blue Smart IP65 charger that would plug into a standard outlet and then connect directly to the battery to keep it topped off. That way, if our main system ever did go out or needed to be worked on, the solar panel would continue to charge the battery and we would continue to have pressurized water. The charger comes in several options. We went with a 120 volt 5 amp version because we really just needed a trickle charge to keep that battery topped up, and then we just kept the default settings on because they're made for lead acid batteries. Who knew that such a tiny 12 volt system could get so detailed? I do hope that our installation breakdown and the wiring guide give you the tools you need to build your own mini remote VRM off-grid system that relays all that data back to you for monitoring. And remember, there's a detailed reference guide with links on our site and even a high-res PDF wiring diagram for you to purchase if you start building your own system. You can find both of those links in the description. If you found this interesting, we're just getting started here on our off-grid homestead. Lots of fun projects coming up, water catchment, permaculture, other small power systems, and so much more. We hope you'll subscribe so that you can see the next video when it comes out, and we'll see you next time.